Okay, hello. This is Telltale Back. I'm Greg,
I'm Emily.
and we're going to talk about another Stephen King novel. This is my second Stephen King novel that I've ever read in my entire life.
I haven't read it yet, so I'm really excited to hear about it.
Yes, at the time I read this, she hadn't read any Stephen King whatsoever yet. We've corrected that, but not with,
we have now remedied that situation.
not with this book. This book is Carrie. And Carrie, of course, is Stephen King's very first novel. The famous story with that one is that he was getting frustrated at getting rejection letters for all of his work that he was sending into publishers and magazines and such. And he wrote Carrie, and he wasn't even going to send it anywhere. He actually took it and put it in the trash. And his wife supposedly pulled it out and encouraged him to send it to a publisher.
I love that.
So he did. And the rest is history. He became, of course, a huge star because Carrie was made into a really excellent movie by Brian De Palma. Mm-hmm. And
which I also have not seen.
You've never seen?
I've never.
It's been made twice.
I know. I saw. Let me put it this way. I have seen so many clips and heard so many people talk about it that I feel like I have seen it.
Yeah.
So it is such a big part of pop culture, though, that I haven't seen it yet, but I feel like I have.
And with books like Carrie and The Shining also, they are so what's the word I want? They're so ingrained in our pop culture that you do pretty much know these books without ever having read them.
Yeah.
But there are things, details that when you read them makes them a whole lot better than what you know from pop culture, or even if you've seen the movie.
Yeah.
In this is a case where Stephen King kind of right away hit upon his style, at least for his first few novels. I've only read 3 of his books so far, so I'm far from an expert, but the 3 I've read all share the common thread that if you took away the supernatural elements, you still have a pretty horrifying story about how people treat other people badly. With all 3 of the books, The Dead Zone was the first one, Carrie was number 2. We went on to The Shining before we actually got around to recording this video.
Yeah.
So I read Carrie. I did it as a buddy read with Samantha, of course.
Yeah.
And the basic story is about a girl who has an extremely religious mother. Very domineering, very extremely religious.
Yeah.
Constantly, and one of the things that you commonly find about extremely religious people, in many instances, they hit their children with a lot of guilt about
a lot of spiritual abuse goes on.
Yeah, even when the children don't even deserve it, they're still getting their parents. They'll still have this super religious parent hitting them with just guilt over all these supposed sins that they've committed, and they haven't done anything. They don't know anything.
They're just being
They're
kids.
Still pretty innocent, and they don't even know what sin is yet, and their parent is, treating them badly, and so it damages them.
Yes.
That is actually a pretty common theme among serial killers and other intensely criminal people.
Yeah, a cult-like mentality in their past of some kind.
And this is what's happening to Carrie. It doesn't doesn't turn her into a criminal or really bad person, but it does cause her to be seen by all the other kids in school as a weirdo. And she's not really the prettiest girl either. She's very awkward. At the beginning of the novel, she comes across as being kind of dumb, though she isn't really. It's just she's just not like everybody else, and so she seems really weird. And King characterizes her that way on purpose because he wants to get across that this is how she's being treated.
Yeah.
So she's being bullied and called names
Mhm.
and never included in things, typical teenage, really bad, really poor treatment of the outsider kid.
That very kill it because it's different mentality is
Mhm.
what I'm kind of hearing.
Mhm.
Like,
And that's really the main theme of this book. And that is, like I say, take away the spiritual element, take away, or not spiritual, but, the mind powers that Carrie ends up having. And you have something that is a very realistic, yet still very horrific story from our everyday lives.
Yeah.
And I think that's what made King so powerful, at least in his early work. That's what made those early novels hit so big, is that so much of the story spoke to people's real life experiences.
It's relatable.
They could identify with Carrie. They could identify with Wendy in The Shining. They could
feel like I can identify with Carrie because I was once a homeschooler that I got shoved into public school suddenly. Yeah. I can relate to that.
And you probably wish you had telekinesis and could blow things up.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be cool.
Because that's the other thing King does, is he shows how these experiences we have, these abuses we suffer, turn us into monsters. Carrie becomes a total monster when she just snaps and loses it and goes on a revenge spree. And that's when the book that's when the book really gets fun. But it's a tragedy.
Yeah, okay? It is tragic.
It's like everybody, I won't say it, but it doesn't have a happy ending.
I feel like Stephen King that's par for the course for him. I hear that most of his stories are pretty tragic, which I actually appreciate tragedy as personally more than I actually like any romances or like comedy novels or anything like that. For some reason, I personally am very drawn to tragedy.
Yeah, anybody that likes Macbeth is going to love Stephen King.
Yeah, even Romeo and Juliet. Yeah, there's a romance in there. But,
it's another tragedy. Yep. So Stephen King fits very much into that. And the story of Carrie then is extremely powerful because it speaks to us today, to our own experiences, but then adds this layer of this telekinetic power that really enhances and emphasizes her feelings and allows her to just go on a terror spree through the town after pretty much everybody, more so than the movie does. The movie is very, and that's the interesting thing when you watch the movie by Brian De Palma. It's pretty close to the book.
Okay.
Probably closer than most King adaptations. Definitely closer than The Shining, closer than The Dead Zone. Brian De Palma's Carrie is closer to the novel, but departs in some very key scenes, which I won't go into because it'll spoil the book for you. But the differences in the book, I think, make the book that much more powerful than the movie. And I'm talking about a movie that's a great movie. This is a 5-star movie on my list, and the book is even better than that.
That's good.
So
I love that there's still that trope too, that the book is better than the movie. I still love that. That just warms my heart as a book lover, because like my husband and I always have that debate too about whether the film, like what's better, the film or the book. And there's only been in one case where the film was better to me than the book was.
What case was that?
Howl's Moving Castle.
I haven't seen either the movie or read the book.
It's good. Like the book is pretty good, but like I really love the way it's portrayed by Hayao Miyazaki. It's an anime film, so it's all animated. The artistry is beautiful. Like it just adds a whole other element to it. It does get rid of a lot of things in the book, but some of that I felt like was kind of frivolous. Okay. Like it didn't need to happen. It didn't seem to perpetuate the story. It did well without it. I just liked it better, personally. Okay.
For me, the one like that is 2001: A Space Odyssey, because of course, the book was a novelization of the movie.
It was derived
and the movie
from
was
the
done
movie.
With so much visual artistry that the book, while it's excellent and it's a 5-star read on my list, it does fall shorter than the movie as
Mm.
far as the total experience.
Okay. Yeah.
So anyway, this is pretty amazing. King had only wrote a bunch of short stories all the way back to like 1963. He had
Mm-hmm.
been writing short stories and sporadically publishing them.
Yeah.
And some of them are in his collection Night Shift, but not all of them. A lot of them are in, I believe they have been collected in different places now, but at that time, they were just short stories that appeared in some of the men's magazines in the late 60s, early 70s, and really didn't make a splash.
Mm-hmm.
And then he wrote this novel that he wasn't even going to publish, but it was put out there and just blew up for him and made his career, made his whole life, really. I mean, I imagine, well, I feel at least one of his books is better than Carrie. I imagine if I were to read books like It or Pet Sematary, I might love those better than Carrie. But at this time, Carrie is like his number 2 novel in my mind. And that's, to call it number 2, the number 1 is that much better.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the number 1 is exceeding a masterpiece because Carrie is a masterpiece.
That's
of a
wonderful.
novel.
I'm very excited to read it. I do intend to. Having read The Shining now, I like his writing style because I guess I kind of had this personal expectation that he would use more flourishy language or something. Like there was some kind of additional element that just made him such an exceptional writer, only to find out it's the simplicity of the stories and just the way he tells the stories with such complex stories with such simplicity is actually why he's such a good writer. Is he can take this crazy ass story and it's super easy to follow, even though it's absolutely like outrageously insane. Like it's just so interesting that he gets on your level. Yeah,
he's a writer very much like Isaac Asimov and H.G. Wells, that certain writers don't really get artsy with their writing. They just tell the story.
Not that I don't like those artsy writers. I like people who are very poetic with their prose.
And that's where you're coming into horror from, is Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft.
And I kind of had that level of thought when it came to King, but he has such his own voice. And that is so unique to him. And now I understand why he's so popular. And I even admitted, like I'd always shied away from King just because I was concerned that he had a few hits and now he's just selling by a name and everybody's like, oh, he's so great. Because I'm like, if so many people like his work, like I have this personal mentality where I'm suspicious of that kind of thing. Like, is his work great because he writes for the average person and therefore produces an average product, or what? You know what I mean? So I had always had that concern and that suspicion that a lot of the time he's being sold by name. And he has just this average ability. But no, he's quite exceptional. The Shining was extremely wonderful. I'm very excited to read the rest of his stuff, especially Carrie.
Yeah.
That sounds really up my alley.
And Carrie is probably one of his shorter books. He's known for writing these really long books that you have to really push through. But Carrie was not. Carrie was for that day, 200, 250 page book was pretty standard. And it's in that range that it sits. Yeah. And so it's, with an easy to read style and a shorter book, it's a fast book to read, but so enjoyable. You almost hate reaching the end because it's such a, and
you mourn the book after you're done.
A lot of people have talked about on YouTube about how they hate the endings of King's books. Personally, I've read 3 of them. I like the endings of all 3, but they are tragic endings. They're not happy endings.
Yeah, because you don't come out of something unscathed.
Right.
Like, I think that's why I appreciate tragedy so much, is that that's real life. You don't always come out unscathed. Sometimes there aren't happy endings. Sometimes you don't get closure.
Well, and his main characters are being turned into monsters in all 3 of these books. Yeah. And so they're not people that are going to have a happy ending. They're people that deservedly are going to meet their ends somehow. I think The Shining was the most upbeat ending of the three.
It actually was pretty upbeat, but it was still tragic because those people are scarred. They are scarred.
Except you see that one coming.
Yeah, you see that ending coming, and then what is it, epilogue or whatever at the end, there's a little bit of a thing there where you just know they're not okay. You just know they're not okay.
Right.
But yeah. I'm excited.
Yeah. So, it's been a lot of fun. I've read 3 King novels pretty much right in a row. Carrie was number 2, and I'm really loving them. I'm looking forward to reading more Stephen King, but
absolutely
just not right away.
I know. It's a little heavy after a while.
Need something a little more fun.
Yeah, I kind of was I was reading The Shining, and then I was reading a little bit more of Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires or whatever, which is also extremely heavy.
But
and then I was reading Paradise Lost with that too, and I'm also extremely heavy.
And that comes after the Divine Comedy.
Yeah, and after the Divine Comedy, and then I picked up this memoir, what's called Dying, which is about this woman who is dying of cancer, and I'm it was really interesting. The first few pages were really interesting, so I was hooked. But then I was just wow, I have a lot of very heavy things, and I'm just drawn to those. But I think, too, it's because I personally have depression. And I understand that life isn't always hunky-dory and happy. And I can relate to people who are in suffering, who have chronic illness issues, who have all those things, because I have those things. And I find them super relatable. So...
But you can only read just so many of those things, and then you got
before you're just especially with seasonal depression, because it's getting darker now. I feel this stuff is super heavy, heavier than normal. So
yeah.
So I've had some short stories and things in between that I'm kind of reading on and off to try and balance that out a little bit. But won't take up so much time that I don't finish books. Oh, yeah. And then on top of that, I had that Joan of Arc book. And you all know she gets burned in the end. So you're oh, well, shit. So it's just wow, I really know how to pick them. But I do get drawn to those books very easily. Because they are just such fascinating. And humans are complex.
Yeah. So that's all I got for Carrie. It's a great read. Go out and read it.
Yay!
You need to read it.
I will read it. I will read it. Is it a top tale?
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Awesome. We finally have some King on our top tales list. Yay!
So with that, have a good evening. We'll see you next video.
See you next time.
Bye.